Hey fellow knitters, Club Kid Knitter here, and today I'm going to show you or demonstrate how to make a brim lined hat. So in other words, a lining for the brim portion of the hat. Now the hat itself and the crown, those two pieces or parts of the hat are not lined, it's just the brim. And so I'll be showing you how to do that. So for this, you will need a few things. You'll need a straight knitting needle. This one is a US 4. You'll need a crochet hook of some sort. And then you'll also need a circular needle that is the same gauge, which of course is a US 4. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a contrasting yarn. This involves a provisional cast-on because what we're going to do is we're going to knit the hat liner up. So in other words, we'll knit the liner first, and then we'll knit the design portion of the hat, and then eventually we'll knit the hat and the crown, and that's where we'll be reducing to the top of the crown. Now, in order to do the lining, we need to be able to have live stitches because we're going to fold the liner in on itself underneath or inside of the actual design portion. And when you do that, after folding it, we'll actually be knitting two sets of live stitches together. The stitches that are obviously on the needle that we're working on, but then also the live stitches at the very beginning of the liner. And that's why we have to do a provisional cast on for that. So to do that, I first make a slip knot, like so. And then we're going to place the slip knot onto your crochet hook. Like so. And if you noticed, I've made it a little loose, and that's because we need to be able to pull the yarn that we're using through it eventually. Alright, so then what you're going to do is you're going to take your straight knitting needle and you're going to put the crochet hook on top of it. The crochet hook will always remain on top of your needle. And then you'll take the working yarn and make sure it's going under the straight knitting needle. See how it's under? And then you're going to hook it and bring it through that slip knot. And then you can pull that slip knot tight. And when I'm doing this, I like to keep the stitch or the loop that's on the hook kind of loose. I don't want it too tight because I don't want to end up splitting the yarn when I'm pulling the working yarn through it with the hook. Alright, so notice how my crochet hook is still above the knitting needle. And so you're going to take the working yarn and you're going to swing it around and under, or under and around the hook, or the needle rather. And then we're going to hook that through, and then you can pull things tight at this point. So that's 2 stitches. Now, I'm going to be casting on a total of 152 stitches for this hat, which means I need to make 152 of these, because these stitches that I'm putting on the straight needle, these are actually the stitches that are going to temporarily hold the bottom stitches for the liner. And then what will eventually happen is we will remove this pink from those stitches, which will release the stitches and reveal them, and that's when we'll put those stitches on a second circular needle. So that's how that works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue and put the 152 stitches onto this straight needle, and when I'm done I will come back and then show you what to do next. Okay, so I have 152 stitches of this pink temporary cast on, if you will. What I did here is I always stop halfway through and double count the stitches or count them again to make sure at the correct number in there, and then I will do the same thing here. But for the time being, what I'm going to do is, after that last stitch, I'm just going to chain out from it a few stitches like this. And then what I'll do is I will cut the yarn here and then just pull that through. And so now it's locked. I'm not going to pull it tight or anything, because eventually when I'm ready to join the liner to the actual brim, I'll need to undo this knot right here so that I can pull it almost like a zip line. Or if you've ever seen bags that are sewn shut, like charcoal bags, for example, they have that stitch through there, and it's a temporary stitch that can be removed. There's usually a piece that you just pull and it unlocks. So that's in essence what we will eventually do with this. So I'm going to go and double count these stitches, and then I will come back and show you what to do next. Okay, so I have exactly 152 stitches on this straight needle. And now what we're going to do is we're going to get ready to actually cast on to the circular needle. Now, this cast on row that we're doing, that will actually be into these pink stitches here, is going to be referred to as row 0. And then row 0 is what will be knitted together with row 33 of your brim to actually create row 34. So basically we're going from 2 sets of stitches back to 1 for that, just for that particular row. Now, the yarn that I'm using for the brim and liner of my hat is Bamboo Pop. It is actually a 50-50 blend of cotton and bamboo, and this is some of the softest yarn I've ever felt. This is really, really soft, and it's also very lightweight. So I'll be using this portion, or this, for the liner. I'm actually using this for the liner, and then both of these for the brim in the Fair Isle. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create a tail. Now this tail will eventually be woven in, obviously, but now we're just going to begin knitting into these stitches. So we're knitting them off of the straight needle and onto the circular needle. That's how we're doing it. And of course, make sure you grab your working yarn and not the tail. And also be careful not to split the stitch of the pink, because if you split the stitch, that particular stitch won't release or this particular stitch, the cream color, won't release when you pull the chain loose, which is, here's the chain here. So that's why you want to be careful making sure you don't split that, so it actually serves its purpose properly. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue knitting down all the way, knitting these stitches off of the straight needle. And again, there's exactly 152 of them, which is nice because at this point I don't have to count. I'm just, each stitch that I see on the straight needle, I'm just knitting completely off. And I know that I'll have my exact stitches because the pattern is an 8-stitch repeat. So that's why you have to make sure you have exactly 152. All right, so I'm coming up to the last few stitches of this pink provisional portion. And what we're going to do next is prepare to what we call join the round. But at this point, here's the last stitch, the straight knitting needle is no longer needed. So you can put that back to where you had it before, but we won't be using that anymore for this portion of the project, or for the project period. All right, so what I'm doing now is I'm locating the back of the spine, you see, and there are all the stitches going through it. So when I pull this, eventually, when this pink part comes out, these little dashes that you see, or these hyphens, those represent the live stitches that you'll place onto a second circular needle eventually to marry with the top portion of the brim. Now, as with all circular knitting, before joining the round, you do want to make sure that you do not have a twist in your work. And so and it's kind of scrunched up, as you can see. But if you kind of accordion them out or spread them out, you want to make sure that they're all facing in the proper direction. Now, the easiest way also to look at this is when you're looking at the needle and going around, you want to make sure that this pink does not go all the way, does not turn one full rotation like that, because that represents a twist. So as long as you don't see that anywhere, you are good to go to join the round. Now, it's important again that you do that, because if not, you'll in effect be knitting a Mobius strip, which is a strip that has a half turn in it, and there is no way to undo that if you go past this first round. All right, so that's the tail. And we have our working yarn here in the right hand. And then of course you've got these pink tails. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these shorter, because I don't really need them for anything. And that way they're out of the way. There we go. All right, so that's a little better. And then what we're going to do is, of course, you want to have have a stitch marker that you place on like that. And now you're ready to join the round. Just go into that first stitch. Now the round is joined. And then just tug on that tail, the white tail. And then just continue around. So the liner is just a straight knitted liner. There's no embellishments or anything. It's just a knitting all the way around for 31 rounds before you switch colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit the liner, knit 31 rounds, and this round that I'm knitting presently is considered round 1. This round that is inside or into the pink is considered round 0. So when I say 31 rounds, I mean starting with this that I'm knitting presently. So this is round 1. All right, so I will see you then. Okay, so this is the liner so far. I've created 31 rounds of the stockinette stitch. We're just going around and knitting, and I'm stopping here at round 31. Now, this is the design that I'm going to do for the brim portion of the hat, or the part that faces the outside. So what I've got here, I've got a total of 34 rounds in this diagram. Now, round 34 is going to be created by knitting rounds 33 and 0 together. Now, of course, you don't see 0 on this diagram or on this chart, round 0 is actually what is in the provisional, so this pink part. So the stitch that goes down in and through, you can see the back of it. Those are the bottoms of the tops of the loops that would continue in the opposite direction. So it's these that we're eventually going to take off of this pink part and then put onto a second circular needle, and then we will knit those stitches with the stitches from round 33 together, and that's what will create round 34, which is just going to be the solid cream color. So it's important to understand that, especially if you start creating charts. So if you, let's say you created a chart yourself, and let's say the very top row, which it could be just one particular color versus 2 in that row or in that round. But whatever round that is, you have to count the rounds below it, because that's how many rounds you must create for the liner. Because the liner and the brim, the number of rounds, they need to match, because if they don't, your liner it won't fold properly. All right, so I'm getting ready to begin round 32, because again, there's 33 rounds in this. And at this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to my contrasting color. Now, this color of the bamboo pop, it's actually called sand, and this will be the color that I will continue, or that I will knit with this cream color here to create the actual design. So I'm going to go ahead and join the new color to my work. And what I like to do is, anytime I join a new color, I like to take the tail and then cross it with the main color, because I'm not taking this cream off, because I'm going to continue using it when I knit the design portion. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to weave this in. I hate weaving in ends at the end of my work, and so what I do is I try to minimize that. So I'm going to go ahead and actually knit this in, or weave it in. And the way that I do that is every other stitch I carry it. So this is very analogous to catching a float. So every other stitch, I'm taking the tail and laying it across the needle, and then taking my working yarn as if to knit, but then I swing the tail up and over out of the way. And so it carries the tail along on the back. And I usually do that for about 10 stitches. That's typically how many I carry in. That's 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and that'll be the last stitch that I use to carry the tail along. But at this point, that tail is woven in, so I don't have to worry about weaving it in at the end. So I am a continental knitter by default. So after doing that, I always switch back to knitting continental versus English. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue knitting round 32 all the way around, and when I come back, I'll show you what to do next. All right, so I'm coming up on the last few stitches of round 32, which again is the where I've joined the new color. So I'm going to slip my stitch marker. All right, now for the final round of this brim, because we're actually still on the brim, we're going to knit a round of purl stitches. And what that does is it actually makes a crease or a fold in your work when doing the stockinette stitch. That's what happens when you, if you were to alternate from doing a round of knit stitches to doing a round of purl stitches. It's very similar to if you have cardstock and you score the cardstock, not all the way through, but just lightly on the back, when you go to bend the cardstock, it bends naturally from that score. The score obviously is on the back side. You wouldn't want to fold it in because it wouldn't be able to because of the score. But in fact, what you're doing is you're putting a score in your work, because we're going to knit the brim like this, and then we're going to need to fold our work so that the wrong sides of both the brim and the liner are smack dab against each other. And then that's when we will, to keep them together, is when we'll knit this round 0 with round 34. So at this point, I'm going to take my working yarn, the sand, and bring it forward to the front of my work so that I can begin purling this round. And again, this is round 33, and it's the final round based on my design and the number of rounds that I have in my design. This is the final round of the brim. So I'm going to go ahead and go all the way around and purl the rest of round 33, and then I'll come back and show you what to do next. Okay, so I'm coming up to the last few stitches for the final round of this liner. So this is round 33, and these are the purl stitches. So technically this is still part of the liner. And here we go. All right, so the liner is finished. That's the liner. So now what we're ready to begin is the actual brim portion of the hat. So I'm going to begin with round 1, which is just a straight round of knitted stitches, and that is in the contrasting color. I am holding the tan color, or the sand color, in dominance, so that it comes out at you, and then the white is the background, so the brown is the foreground, the white or the cream is the background. So it's the brown portion that will be coming out towards you as in dominance. And I'm a two-handed knitter when I knit Fair Isle, so what that means is I hold the brown or the tan in my left hand, and I knit continental with it. And then the cream color I hold in my right hand, and I knit English style with it. And if you knit with both yarns in one hand, doesn't matter if it's the left or the right, you want to hold them like this. So in other words, you want the brown to the left, the cream to the right. Because in essence what you're doing is all the bars, or all the floats, the segments on the back, will always be on top of the tan. That's how yarn dominance works. And same thing in the left hand is you, oops, lost my stitch marker, you hold the tan to the left and then the cream to the right when you're throwing. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit the actual design portion of the brim, and I'm going to knit all the way up to round 33, and that's where I'll stop and come back and show you what to do next. Okay, so I have just finished the brim portion to this hat. So I've done the liner and the Fair Isle portion, which of course is the brim part that faces outward. Now, what I'm doing right now, if you recall, we've been knitting on a US 4, a circular needle. And for this portion of the hat, including the lining, everything was knitted to the gauge of a US 4. Now, what I have right now is I have a US 3 on here. So I just took my US 4 off and put a US 3 in its place. And then what I'm getting ready to do is to remove the provisional cast on and put these stitches onto also a US 3. And the reason being is I only have one US 4. I can actually alleviate this problem by going out and buying more US 4s, but I only have one. And as a rule of thumb, if you are going to, we have one more row to knit, and it has to be one more row of a US 4. That's why I took my US 4 out. It doesn't matter what gauge these stitches or the cast-on stitches are on, as long as they are on a needle that is a gauge less than a 4. So it could be a 3, it could even be a 2, because the gauge of the stitch always takes on that of the needle you are knitting onto, which in this case is going to be a US 4 again. So that's why I had to do that. Normally I don't, but because we still have one more round to knit with a US 4, I had to free up my US 4. So that's why I did that. I should really just go out and buy more US 4s, but if you only have one, always keep that in mind. Now, the other thing that I've done is I've woven in any loose ends. I've already done that, and actually this is where we joined the new color, and I already wove that in as we knitted. All right, so now what we're ready to do is, and let me make sure I've got the right, okay, so here's the 3. So what we need to do now is we need to remove this provisional cast on so that we can start putting these live stitches onto this needle. Now recall that we did actually tie this right here, where we made it into a knot so that we could remove it. There we go. So you see how the chain's coming, but real quick before we do that, I want you to look at the back. Now in the back you have these little minuses here. So here's one, here's one, here's one. Now this one here that's looped around, that was actually my tail. Now one of the things that's peculiar about this is this first one here wasn't actually there, because this loop that goes around here was actually created when I wove the tail down in here. And that's important to know, because you do want to grab that. Because if you don't grab this, if you start here instead to pick up your first stitch, when you go all the way around, you're going to have one less stitch on your new needle here than you do up here. And that's because of the way the stitch starts with the tail, because it's only half of a stitch when you have the tail that's actually a tail. But because I kind of curved the tail in back into the work and then wove it in, that will be my first one. So what we're going to do, and you want to do this slowly, and what you'll also have to do is, I'm actually going to go ahead and put that on and then get the next one on. There's the next one. And then at this point what you can do is I'm just going to do this for the time being. And so now each one of these you're going to pick up like so. So there's the second stitch, or the second real stitch. Don't forget we already picked up that tail. And then you go into the back of the next one. and then you can remove that. So sometimes people will put several on and then they'll undo it. In other words, making sure that the stitch is already on the needle before removing this part, like that. I'm kind of that mindset. I have a phobia of live stitches that either don't have a lifeline or a needle in them. So as you can see, I'm just going through and I'm always picking it up from under, because what you're doing is you're picking up the right leg of that stitch. And so I've got a few more like that. And of course, the other thing that you want to be mindful of when doing this, make sure you don't split or accidentally go into the pink portion, because then it won't, see how I did that like that? Then it won't come out properly. So you always want to make sure you're in front of it. All right, so I'm going to go all the way around and continue doing this, and then I'll meet you on the other side. Okay, so I've got all of the stitches off of the provisional cast-on, and so of course we can toss this pink now because we don't need that anymore. But I've got all of them on the second US 3 needle, because again, I went down a gauge for both needles so that I could end up finishing round 33, which is this one right here. So I've already done 33 rounds, I'm sorry. This is round 34 that we're on. So I had actually just finished round 33. So 34 is the last round in the brim. And of course that is going to consist of joining these stitches with these stitches. Now recall the row or the round of purl stitches, and you see how it's causing that fold to happen. And so basically all we're going to do is, and you want to be careful that the stitches don't come off of this needle, and in fact if you want to do it like that to make the hole smaller, because what you're going to do is push this liner down through or into the brim, like so. You see how it's going around and it's forming a crease where the purl stitches were. And so you want to bring everything to the top. And of course the only yarn attached right now is the cream color, because I detached the sand, because that was only being used for the second color in the Fair Isle portion. Alright, so we've got, looks like 4 needles. It's actually 2 needles with 2 ends. So here's the beginning, and then here's the end. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull these down, these stitches in the back, onto the cords, because we're going to be starting on this end and knitting these two together. So of course you want to make sure that you have the working yarn available. Get that positioned into the knit position. And now we're just going to begin knitting the front stitch to the back, to the corresponding back stitch. And so now what I'm doing is I'm going down and knitting both sides together back onto the US 4, because this last round, round number 34, is still in the gauge of a US 4. And this is the last round like that. And then starting with the next round, when I begin the hat, that will actually be on a US 3 for the rest of the remainder of the project. So I'm just going through and knitting the brim portion to the liner portion. So I'm going to continue around doing that, and then I will meet you at the end so that we can compare work and see what it looks like. Like so. All right. So this is the, we have now created the double, or the lined brim. Of course, you can see the inside is the knitted liner, the outside is the design portion, and that is it for that. So now what I'm going to get ready to do is knit the hat and crown. And for the hat and the crown, now we switch to the US 3. So I temporarily put round 33 onto US 3, or a US 3, and then the provisional cast-on stitches also onto a US 3, and then knitted them together back onto the US 4 that we have been knitting from the very, very beginning of the project, because we want to maintain that gauge for the entire brim of the hat. And so now I'm getting ready to switch to a US 3, and then I also have a US 3 40-inch that I will be converting to when I do magic loop to do the crown, to reduce to the very top. Okay, so now I'm ready to begin the actual hat portion, or the hat and the crown. And of course, this is where I switch to a US 3 for the remainder of the hat. And then I also switch to my different yarn. I'm using the Caron Super Soft, or I'm sorry, Caron Simply Soft 6 ounce. And this is the color that I'm going to do on this hat for my colorway. All right, so this is our old yarn that we detached. This was the bamboo pop. And so now here's the beginning of the round, and I'm just going to add my new color. And then what I always do anytime I add a new color is I do a single tie with the old yarn to close that gap that usually, or that always occurs when you join a new yarn or a new color. And then I'll just draw that tight when I weave that in too. When I come around, I'll pull everything snug again. But what I'm doing is I'm knitting 10 rounds, just straight knitting with the new color. And then I just follow the reduction pattern, or the reduction that's outlined in the pattern, to get to the crown, because this is actually a gradual decrease over the hat when doing the crown. And so basically what that means is you do a decrease and then knit a few rounds and then do another decrease. But those are all identified in the actual pattern. Okay, so this is actually the finished hat. And again, the instructions or the full pattern how to make this hat in its entirety appears in the description section. It's actually linked to my Ravelry store that has, it's a free pattern. The pom-pom I made, and actually I will be making a video, a short tutorial on how to make these, but it's very, very light. I love making these pom-poms because a traditional pom-pom is very, very heavy. If it was, you know, this size, whereas this has some polyester fill in it, but it's very, very light, and it's kind of a nice top off to your hat. But I want to thank you for watching this video. Please do subscribe to my channel, and if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, I do welcome those as well. I do respond to all of those. So again, thank you for watching.